What's up, Irish mythology fans? Oh, wait, no. Well, that's part of our discussion today. But horror fans, Pete here from the Lasser Cast, and I'm with my good friend, my partner in crime, Dr. Zayas God, who I wish I could go live in an Irish cabin with together and have a baby.
I mean, I would promise to leave the liver out.
There you go. Nice recovery. Danny, I must be in a good mood because it is the summer. We are recording. We have horror to talk about. We're taking a little break from our Wes Craven month just to talk about a new Shudder release. So, Unwelcome. Danny, you heard about this on Twitter, right?
I mean, I stay up to date on like whenever whenever Shudder releases their like upcoming calendar, or usually at the end of one month they'll release a calendar for what's coming in the next month, and I'm always looking at their Shudder exclusives and their new horror films that are being released. I actually just watched a movie the other day. I rented it on Vudu called The Angry Black Girl and Her Monster, which is like a new urban take on Frankenstein.
Oh, that's cool.
Really interesting. And that was, the Shudder banner came up at the beginning, which leads me to believe it will be on Shudder very soon. I have a short review up on the channel now of the new Joe Lynch, Heather Graham, Barbara Crampton, H.P. Lovecraft adaptation Suitable Flesh, which is going to be a Shudder release later this year. That's a 30-second review everybody can check out. So one of the main things that we do on this channel, I feel, that we've done for the last 3 years or so is cover new things that Shudder puts out, whether they're series or movies like this. And occasionally we dive into one of these new releases that we know not much about, and we take a chance and we see what the movie has for us.
Yes, we roll the dice, and sometimes we like it, and sometimes we don't. I think like a good example of one that we didn't like was that movie. Wasn't it called like They? And it was that movie where it was like the woman in the woods. Do you remember that? Like
it was called The Hunted.
Oh, okay.
Or
Good.
Hunted, maybe just Hunted.
Yes.
Yeah, we didn't particularly love that one, but then, Shudder is a place that allowed us to see Speak No Evil, which was a movie that just ended up on our top 10 of 2022 list. A movie that we probably would never have thought to check out if not for Shudder.
Right, exactly. I wanted to do like a negative example and then a positive example, and boy, did you go to a really good positive example. I think that was my number one for last year, was Speak No Evil. So
it was very close to the top, yeah.
So, we always try to we don't usually try to review movies to bash them, but it's kind of funny because I'm looking at some of the reviews for this movie right now, like as I looked it up doing some research, and here's one from a guy named Patty Demps. This is just right on Google. I would give this movie 0 stars if I could. I wish I could unwatch this movie and pretend I had never heard of it. Awful acting and just very bad story in general. The little goblin creatures weren't even that very good. The only good part of this film. Oh, go ahead.
So I didn't love this movie, but I think that's kind of an exaggerated negative reaction there. I think this movie is, first of all, I do think it's a little too long for what it was trying to go for. It's an hour and 45 minutes. This movie felt like 80 to 90 minutes would have been very appropriate. There's also, spoilers alert. I'll try not to spoil the movie, but there is a part at the end of this movie that I felt was the natural ending to the movie. And then there's another full, secondary climactic scene.
Right.
That I felt was kind of unnecessary. And I thought it gives the viewers a look into a world that I liked better when it was teased and it was left to our imagination. So I did think the movie went a little bit too long. I will say one of the positives of this movie for me were And I guess it's a spoiler, but it kind of tells you when you read the credit reaction, or like the synopsis of this movie, there are little goblin creatures in it, and I thought they were pretty good. They reminded me, they were much less the goblins from Troll 2, and they felt almost like a bigger version of like the monster from either Cat's Eye.
Yeah, I knew you were gonna say that.
Or yeah, Rumpelstiltskin, or like one of those little elf.
Yeah.
They were like a larger version of that, and I looked into I just looked at the trivia on IMDb, and it said that they were basically, those were actors and they were practical. The CG was used a little bit on the faces of them, but they looked good for a movie that didn't feel like it was a big budget movie. I like the setting of the movie. I mean, the director of this movie, John Wright, did a movie. He's obviously Irish, and he did a movie back in 2012 called Grabbers, which is fantastic. It's like Ireland gets beset by these like H.P. Lovecraft-esque tentacle monsters, and the greatest thing about it, it's a horror comedy. The monsters are allergic to alcohol, so all the Irish people drink to get drunk to save themselves to fight off these monsters.
That's incredible.
And and when I realized the director of Grabbers did this movie, my first thought, reading the synopsis, seeing that this was a movie about little goblins, red caps, as they're called in the movie, I thought this was going to trend more into the horror comedy realm, and it goes so far in the opposite direction. That was my biggest problem with this movie was, and I don't want, maybe it was because I knew he did Grabbers, so I was expecting more of a lighthearted kind of, but from like the opening scenes of this movie, there's so much like anger and nastiness and real like awful, like people who are just awful human beings doing awful things.
Yes.
And I feel like the two protagonists, the main characters, I didn't like them enough. Their entire character trait was victims.
Wow. That's actually so well put, man. So well put. I'm so glad that you said it that way, because I was
Have
like,
a good one, everybody. No.
Yeah, you could kind of just wrap it up right there. It's funny. Two things, right? Another review that, if you look this up like on Amazon, another review is like, oh, this is another movie where all the men are weaklings or they're like cruel. And they start to go off this sort of like, misogynistic rant about how, the male characters should be strong and stuff, female characters. But anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that it does kind of seem like every single person in this movie is mean or fucked up, except for the main characters, who they themselves are just victims, just like you said. And I was thinking that while I was watching it. There is the woman who was like friends with the guy's aunt, and she seemed to be kind of nice to them and trying to help them out. And then there was the guy in the store. But the main interaction that our two main characters have is with these punks in the very beginning that fucking are like just regular punks in a store, just kind of messing with him, and then just become like vicious.
You almost feel like you're watching like I Spit on Your Grave, or like some real nasty rape revenge shit at the beginning of this movie. And it really turned me off because this wasn't, a lot of times I'll put on a horror movie at night after like a long day on the weekends. Like it was my wife's birthday this weekend. So like we just had like activity. My daughter had soccer. She went to a party. We went to the Pride Parade. We did a shitload of activities this weekend. Yeah, and like when I sat down to watch this movie, I was expecting kind of like a lighthearted goblin movie. And like we get like a pregnant woman being attacked and like kicked around at the beginning of this movie.
Yes.
We get and then like they move and you're like, okay. And then it just like the same story repeats over again, where like they hire this obviously fucked up family and this to like fix their house.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel very believable that like these nice people that you're referring to, these like really like tertiary characters in the background, would be like, oh, welcome to our small town, and oh, you should oh, they're okay, you should let them fix your house. And it's like they're these awful, like cliche ridden characters. Like it just like it yeah, I really didn't like these characters at all. I wrote down like it's really hard to care and root for Jamie, the husband in this movie. Like he doesn't have any redeeming characteristics. Like
Yeah.
he gets beat up at the beginning. Like he moves his pregnant wife, to a house that he inherited from a dying relative, and they get immediately picked on by the next group of bullies. And like it's just like there's one scene in this movie that drove me really crazy, and that was when you first encounter the Red Caps. Like you finally, after it feels like an hour, 50 minutes, you finally get to see what you're dealing with here. And it's after this like really out of nowhere scene where Hodor like tries to rape Ghost from Ant-Man and the Wasp. We should say the lead actress in this movie is Hannah John Kamen, who plays Maya. She was Ghost in Ant-Man and the Wasp. She was also in a few episodes of Game of Thrones. And her husband is played by Douglas Booth, who played Nikki Sixx in The Dirt.
Oh, okay.
And I like crazy how different he is in this movie. In this movie, his character battles with the dirt. But so the actor who plays Hodor in Game of Thrones, Christian Nairn, Irish names, I'm not going to do them well or justice. He is like this abused kind of like, at first I thought he was mute, and then he starts like talking, and he immediately goes from being like this sympathetic oaf to being a rapist.
Like immediately. Snap.
And you're like, what, like, come on.
Right.
And then you finally see these Red Caps. They like, we find out that they came out and killed him and saved her.
Right.
And she runs home to tell her husband. And he's like, you're crazy. I'm going to the pub. And I'm like,
Yeah. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because there's parts of this movie that just don't kind of add up, right? I almost wondered if they added that scene in the beginning with the attack to give the movie more depth. Like there's one thing that confused me, right? Because I want to address what you said, but I kind of want to add this just to talk about it. There's a scene where they go and they talk to a priest, right? And the priest says, "Is this your first child?" And then she goes, "Well, sort of." Now, I thought that it was going to be, we were pregnant and then we got attacked and I lost the baby. That's what I thought it was going to be. But then it turns out that it was, they were pregnant, or she was pregnant with another guy's kid a long time ago and had an abortion. And I was like, okay, so like, what are they trying to say here? And in general, it seems like the idea of this movie is that, like, if you're a weakling, people are going to bully you and you have to be aggressive to not be bullied. That seems to be the message based on like the story that is told here, right? And both characters, like the wife and the husband, both are attacked and bullied in this movie. And then at the very end, they both kind of stand up for themselves. And that's when finally the bullying stops, right? Pretty simple idea. But that scene with like the pregnant brain thing, that's once again like another scene that just kind of doesn't make sense. Like the husband is the most inconsistent one, right? He gets attacked and he seems almost like a weakling in the beginning. And then you learn later on that he's like boxing and stuff to sort of like compensate for being attacked and sort of making up for the fact that he like let his wife get attacked. And then he kind of flips on and off between being a weakling and being like overly aggressive and angry. And you'd think that like when she said this guy was in the woods and he attacked me, he wouldn't be like, oh, you're just pregnant and crazy. You know, he would get mad, right?
Yeah.
I,
a lot of the characters feel inconsistent. I want to. You mentioned the scene at the beginning. It feels almost kind of separated from the rest of the movie.
Right.
So I want to make a comparison to the last movie that we reviewed on this channel.
Okay.
Red Eye by Wes Craven.
Oh.
This movie is an hour and 44 minutes. We made a big deal of the fact that if you take the end credits out, Red Eye is barely an hour and 20 minutes.
Right.
Both female leads in this movie were victims of a physical attack before the main plot of the movie begins.
Yeah.
In Red Eye, they suggest that Rachel McAdams' character, she's reading a self-help book. She has a scene where she shows the scar that she has.
Right.
She very briefly mentions what happens, but never do we see a 10-minute flashback sequence. Nope. Never do we see the violent act itself. We're smart enough viewers to put A and B together to understand that this is a woman who had been through a really awful ordeal and was really, trying to get herself back into things, trying to trust people again. She meets this nice guy in an airplane. Oh, it could be the beginning of a romance, and oh, fuck, he's the bad guy.
Right.
This movie does the complete opposite. It gives you a almost 15, maybe a 10-minute prologue sequence where, we go through the whole, is she pregnant? He's going to go to the store and buy champagne. He encounters these thugs. And the next thing you know, they're kicking in the door. They're beating everybody up. They're kicking a pregnant woman in the chest. They're holding knives to their throats.
Yeah.
And it's like, Red Eye is a better movie. Right. Red Eye moves faster. We feel, we identify with Rachel McAdams' character because we can, we don't have to, we don't look at her. We look at her as somebody who's trying to come back from an incident. We look at her as somebody who's working towards her improvement. Whereas these characters are, from the opening sequence, yes, they're a loving couple, but then they're instantly victimized. Right. And that's what we get from these characters. And that's pretty much what they are until the final 10 minutes of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. A really good point, man. Yeah. And it's like stuff that you see from a mile away, right? Because they celebrate their pregnancy. They're all happy and stuff. And then he's like, I'm going to go to the store and get some alcohol. And then it's like, you see these guys standing outside the store. It's like, okay, those guys are going to like jump him. I thought they were actually going to kill him in the very first scene. I didn't know where the story was going to go. But then, like once they introduce this other family, this guy in this pub gives them a warning about Colin Meaney and his kids. He says this weird thing about how it's like, you better keep the sons away from the daughters because she'll end up sleeping with them. But, he should have been like, they're fucking vicious killers that will like choke a pregnant woman to death, right? Without any calm. Like, that's the problem, right? I'm pretty sure in the first scene, those guys attack her. And the guy says, I'm just trying to celebrate my wife is pregnant or something like that. And they literally kick her on the ground. So they know they're kicking a pregnant woman. Then in the climactic scene with the family, she's like super, like she's about to give birth, right? and like the sister's just choking her on the ground as she's pregnant. It just, I understand that there are vicious killers and it's to show they have no remorse. They're going to do whatever they want, right? But I think even vicious killers kind of pause for a second there when it's like this woman's pregnant or this is a kid.
For me, the disconnect is if you're going to make a movie about a couple who is consistently victimized and has to fight back against their enemies. You can make a movie like that. Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs is a version of that story where Dustin Hoffman is this little wimpy husband. His wife gets attacked. His wife gets raped. And he becomes he becomes the psycho killer at the end, like brutally beat. And the remake of that was really good too with James Marsden. That story is one story that can happen. When your movie is set in Ireland, using Irish lore, using Irish mythology, using Irish mythical creatures, and you have this established kind of like fairy tale setup where there's like this gate in their backyard with a latch and it opens into the forest, and there's this hut at the end of the trees with a staircase that goes down into a lit. You're making two different movies here. You're making an Irish fairy tale horror movie, and you're making like a Straw Dogs, I Spit on Your Grave, visceral rape revenge style movie.
Right.
When you mix those two, you get this kind of convoluted mess that this movie ends up being. There are parts of this movie I really liked. I liked the mythology part of it. I liked the whole idea of your aunt who left you the house truly believed that the only way to keep these goblins at bay was to leave them food every night. And that idea of, oh, fuck, we forgot to leave food out. And will they, I thought this movie was going to be, they go to the house, they have the baby, and then the goblins come for the baby or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm watching this Colm Meaney and his kids, burning their house down and choking pregnant women while these goblins come in as like these Avengers almost at the end. And then there's this like flip at the end where there's this extra kind of ending that takes it up. There is a really good 80-minute movie here. I think they just focused on the wrong parts of it.
Yes.
Even if, to your point, if the opening scene was pregnant woman, husband goes out to get alcohol, thugs jump him and kill him, and now she inherits the land, and now she's a single mother with a baby on the way, and you hear this legend of the red caps and feeding them, and it becomes that kind of like, and she having had her family be victimized can now like avenge, go after the baby when it's kidnapped. That's a totally different movie that's in here.
Yes. And that's a much better movie. It's really interesting. I'm really glad that you brought up the two different movies in one, right? Because the cinematography is actually really great for this. All the shots of like showing that door, that passageway into this woods, great stuff. Like when you look down, like kind of the spiral staircase to go into their little den, their little goblin den, beautiful stuff, right? When they're all gathered together, it has this kind of like fake, almost like a stage play look to it. Like the background, like the actual like scenery looks like it's fake. Like it looks like it's on a stage. And I like that. It reminded me of like Labyrinth.
Yeah.
And the movie itself reminds me of Labyrinth. One of the reviews I read was this. Here you go. This is a testament to what you were saying, Danny. They said it's Straw Dogs meets Gremlins. And
Wow.
I think that's actually kind of accurate because the Red Caps do act like gremlins. They kind of talk like them too and stuff.
It also bothered me that the Red Caps spoke English. Like
Right.
I thought if they're mythical Irish creatures, they would be speaking like Gaelic or like Old Irish, and
Right.
I shouldn't be able to understand them. Maybe put subtitles for like or like a create a language for them. Like the one scene that I love, just like that you mentioned the cinematography, where the drunk guy is walking home, and you have this beautiful shot of this castle or church in the background.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you just see something jump down from it. And you're like, oh, okay. And
right.
it's such a sudden little thing, and it just feels weird that the movie wants the Red Caps to be the like perceived threats, but they spend 80 to 90% of their screen time being like almost heroes, only to then become almost villains at the end.
Yeah.
I feel like again, I feel like this is the people who worked in this movie obviously have talent.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
The director has made a good horror movie before.
Yeah.
I feel like he just, had two ideas and decided to mesh them into one instead of maybe making two separate movies. One about this, Irish fairy tale horror movie, and then another like Straw Dogs-esque like rape revenge thriller.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, the movie feels like half of it is trying to be like a Guillermo del Toro movie. And part of Guillermo del Toro's, I mean, the most obvious example is Pan's Labyrinth, right? Where there's this mythology and then there's this brutality in the real world, right? And I think that's kind of what they're doing here. They're doing like an Irish Pan's Labyrinth, but it just doesn't work in either regards. The mythological stuff looks kind of like they're attempting Pan's Labyrinth a couple of times,
Yeah.
But if Guillermo was to make this movie versus the people that did make it, what he would do is he'd have a lot of creepy scenes where like you just see like a hand or something from one of these creatures, or they leave some kind of weird thing they made, like a weird little carving or something by the door, and you just see their shadow and you hear like whispers and stuff. There'd just be a lot of scenes like that. And what you were talking about before, where you were saying like the main character, she could have inherited this house and then maybe she got attacked later and they rescued her. What I like better is she goes to grieve in this remote place, and where she stays, there's this mythology about these red caps, and she has to leave down the tribute. And then she finds out that like it's dangerous, and maybe she was lured there in the first place because she was a single mother about to have a baby, and maybe they want to take the baby and like kidnap
like
it.
Yeah, like the town could be involved. It could be like there's so many. I feel like we're talking less about the movie and more about what the movie could have been.
Yes, we are. We are.
But this, one thing that we mentioned earlier with Shudder, like any streaming service, they have hits and misses, but they give these movies a shot. And this is a movie that it does have things that might appeal to viewers. Like there are the goblins are cool.
Yeah. Oh,
You have some actors and actresses that you're going to recognize in this movie. You mentioned obviously Cole Meany is probably most famous from Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Deep Space Nine, both of them.
Oh, Deep Space Nine. Sorry, yeah. He plays one of the lead villains. Hodor is one of his sons. Ghost from Ant-Man the Wasp. It wasn't. I think it's a flawed film, but it wasn't. It's not a zero movie. I think this is probably like a 5. I think it's a 5 out of 10. It's a middling movie. It has some good ideas, but I think it goes off on too many tangents.
Really well put, man. I agree completely. Yeah, and that's what we kind of do when we watch these Shudder movies. You do your little speech at the end where you're like, "Hey, well, there's something good about it," and we tried. Shudder puts out good stuff. And
I mean, look, I'll defend Shudder to the end. I mean, I'm not, no streaming service is going to put out bangers all the time. But, while they put out, this movie that wasn't our cup of tea, we still get Joe Bob every Friday. We still get, all the series that we've covered, whether it was 101 Scariest Movie Moments, whether it was Queer for Fear, whether it was Cursed Films. We get all these series that we love and we talk about in depth. So if it means once every few months we get a movie that isn't a total banger, I'm okay with it.
Look at this little sexy comment here from a sexy commenter, Chris D'Onofrio. This movie has 2 different versions that blended together as well as oil and water. Look at that. You guys can check out his review on Future Boy Chris. I bet he's either got one up or he's gonna get one up.
Yeah. You know, Chris usually is far better than us at getting a very concise opinion up. If you want a very concise opinion, that statement there basically sums up the last 30 minutes and 20 seconds of our review in one line. So as usual, Chris knocks it out of the park in one line.
Yes. And if you guys like meandering long reviews, though, make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Danny and I have been covering Wes Craven films that are not part of the Scream franchise or Nightmare on Elm Street franchise this month. We've already done The People Under the Stairs. We've done Red Eye, like Danny said before. And then we also did Shocker, right?
Shocker!
I was waiting for you to do that, man. We are going to cover The Hills Have Eyes. That's going to be next, because that's the one I'm leaning towards. And then we also are going to eventually cover Life of Chuck, which is one of 4 novellas in Stephen King's kind of more recent book, If It Bleeds. Now, one little side I want to say to that, Danny, is that If It Bleeds has this one story, the main story, the story that is the title, If It Bleeds, and that's like a sequel to this show called, this book called The Outsider. And there was a show based on it starring Jason Bateman and Ben Mendelsohn, and it was just like incredible. It was like one of the
Mad Eye Moody.
Okay, so I'm glad you're asking that. Yeah, the guy
or
who's
am I confusing that with
Patrick Gleason? So you're asking about
Brendan
Patrick
Gleeson.
Brendan Gleeson. Thank you. Brendan Gleeson is in a show called Mr. Mercedes.
That's right. Okay. Because I know that Stephen King's newest book, Holly, is a character from Mr. Mercedes. Right. See, I didn't watch The Outsider. I have to watch The Outsider.
I almost want to like pay you to watch it, Danny, because it's so good, and we'd be talking about it like crazy. But I mean, you have money. So anyway, Mr. Mercedes.
The reason we're going to cover Life of Chuck is because Mike Flanagan is scheduled to be adapting that into a film starring Mark Hamill and Tom Hiddleston, which, okay, I'll watch that. So, whatever Mike Flanagan touches, we cover on this channel. And I thought it would be interesting to read the novella first. It's a very bizarre 3-act story that works backwards chronologically. It's very, very strange. Only Mike Flanagan could adapt this into a film. I can't see any other filmmaker going and trying to do this.
I agree with you on that one. Yeah. I'm looking forward to that adaptation. There's always talk about him covering The Dark Tower too. We even did a video on that at one point of who would he cast, right? But going back to your Holly Gibney thing, they did have a Mr. Mercedes TV show, and Holly Gibney's in that. And there's other books after this. I actually just found this in a little library today while I was doing my job.
Yeah, I read the trilogy. I know it's End of Watch, Finders Keepers, and End of Watch are books 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Those were some of my pandemic running books that I listened to on Audible. Nice. So I'm interested to see Holly, or to read Holly when it comes out.
Yeah. So coming up on the channel, just so you guys know, we're going to do The Hills Have Eyes, probably anything else that's coming up on Shudder, and then we are going to talk about Life of Chuck. And maybe we'll also do Mr. Harrigan's Phone, because that's the story right before Life of Chuck and before If It Bleeds, too.
Mm-hmm.
So, we got a lot coming up. Danny is constantly putting out shorts and doing all these reviews. And, it's a good time to subscribe to the Lastercast for Summer of Horror. We will see you guys. Oh, Chris is still commenting. What did he say? This movie. Oh, wait. That's the same fucking comment. All right, Chris, we love you. And we love you all that watch. We'll see you.